Hi guys, Hengist here from Military Wargaming, and a big welcome back to our old and new subscribers. Today, French Somaliland 1940, episode 10, Action Stations. And here's our theatre of operations. But today we're looking at naval wargaming in East Africa. And I'm very inspired by Commando comics on this and a lot of the game systems out there. And we've worked quite extensively on this over the last few years. We're looking here at prep for 100 and 1800 scales, and here are some of my 15mm vessels. I use interchangeable decks. I had to collect all sorts of paraphernalia to go with this, especially for the 15mm operations. And you know, everything from, I suppose, crew and frogmen, although they're not really around in 1940, and you know, scratch building a lot of stuff. And here are some dhows, and you don't always get it right first time, and that's what I learned. And subsequently I've adapted the system, and I produced, I think, far better outcome here with these ships. This is all for immersion. It's all to create these games that get the players involved with all the sort of risks and problems, and also to reflect what is actually going on in theatre. And these also create very stimulating games when we get the chance to put them on. I think you'll see from the photographs I'm very happy with it, and of course you know, everything from submarines. But when you get to 1800 scale, this is a little bit more problematic, and I find it difficult to paint and work at this scale, especially for the photography. But I think we've done pretty well, and please forgive my attempts on this at this scale, including building dhows, you know, minefields and all of that, all big problems. But we managed to get the fleets ready, and that's the key thing. So without further ado, let's get into what we're actually doing here and what naval considerations I had. I had to consider the whole Indian Ocean, all the fleet action, but I obviously wanted to confine it to the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. So we defined particular zones, we looked at the research and the history, and we developed a lot of precepts based on that. Here's the Bab el-Mandeb, which is a critical strait, only 20 kilometers long, I think. And here's our battle map that we're going to be using. We structured a load of rules here. Again, this is all very exploratory as we set out in our mission goals for this phase testing. But I'm pretty happy with it. I think the players are happy with it. And ultimately we're using sort of a victory at sea version, which we're obviously changing. We've got and done all the orders of battle for the fleets. So looking at the first turn, this is a sort of comparison of the orders that were issued, and we also have the French Navy, very small here, but it's all based on the historical event. We've called this Convoy B31. That's where we started the campaign, and this is the outcome here of the number of potential games. So in fact we do have 3 games in this session for our first naval operations. Right, let's turn our attention to naval actions this turn. This is game 1, which is a convoy and bombing attack. Here's the displacement of the convoy itself with escorts. They have corvettes when they are to be attacked by SM-79s. A lot of bombers coming in on this attack run, as you can see here. They actually play a card and give engine trouble to one of the vessels, and the destroyer series arrives immediately. You can see the bombers going in here. They actually hit the British consul and cause damage. There's a lot of anti-aircraft fire from the corvettes, and one SM-79 is shot down. They're coming in low, literally over the ships, and you can see bombs missing. More aircraft seem to be coming in, wave after wave of it, in fact. And they're bombing quite specifically at targets, not accurate all the time. Very difficult to hit a moving ship. But again, the Clyde field is hit, and although there are some other misses, it's getting a bit worrying with the number of hits, especially with the British judge. She's now hit. A lot of 6s being rolled. You can see the ship there burning in the background as the Clyde field is hit again, and this time she's actually crippled, which is a major problem. So you can see with the red dots what damage was undertaken. And let's move into game 2 now, convoy bombing and submarines. Again, a bit of a more complex scenario here with bombers and the subs. Now the Italian subs are not reliable, and this is going to be a problem. As you can see, the destroyers responding to the aircraft. The Ellinger has got engine problems and is slow. You can see the destroyers and the corvettes moving amongst their convoy as the 2 subs appear. Literally, the corvette spots and opens fire, and both subs then crash dive. You can see the dot there, that was their last known position. The Ellinger is falling behind. She's got close support when the cruiser Carlisle arrives and the destroyer Kimberley. But you can see all the sonar blips. This is something we incorporated, but unfortunately with the number of escorts they're spotted again. But they've got bombers coming in and an experimental torpedo flight, and they're coming in again, targeting the troop ship, and she is hit quite critically actually, and she's now adrift, really not responding as those torpedo bombers come in. Now one of these manages to drop and hit with a great roll as well, and that effectively blows her to pieces and sinks her. You can see the Ellinger going down now, 600 men on board as the rescue attempts are made desperately, but the sub is now being chased by the Flamingo. Depth charges being launched all over the place and dropped, and one actually hits and completely destroys the sub, all souls lost. The other submarine, Perla, now tries to escape. Archimedes has been sunk, but she is desperate to avoid this, and it's a cat and mouse game as we see a lot of explosions here trying to sink her, but she manages to evade. We've also got the Hohud that's hit by bombers, and the Jarashamami is also hit as well. You can see now that there's a lot of problems for the Royal Navy, because you've got a ship that's going down, you've got more 79 shot down, and some aboard. But the convoy's really been broken up, and they are desperately depth charging the Perla. She's a real threat. But she keeps sort of going deep, and the only thing they can now do is focus, including the Carlisle, on the rescue attempt for the number of men in the water. Again, you can see the red dots where the main ships are sunk or hit. Well, let's turn to our final mission, which is Game 3, Convoy Destroys the Submarine. Here again, an even more complex scenario with the Italians laying mines. They're also going to be basically cut across by the convoy. So as they're laying the mine operation, they're being pursued as well by the Royal Navy. This is really problematic. You can see them there laying smoke. The convoy is moving directly towards them. You can see where the sea mine's boundary, that's all they've managed to lay before they had to sort of leg it. But the Indus goes in, the sloop, she doesn't hit a mine, but the destroyers now come across the convoy, open fire. The Mahura is hit. There's an exchange of gunfire between the corvette and the destroyers, which was very plucky, when the submarine Galileo Ferreras arrives. And she's also met by the convoy escort with the Hobart, and that's going to be rather an interesting one. She's got the Auckland as well supporting her. Now the cruiser opens fire, and this puts sheer terror onto the destroyers. Luckily they're missed, concealed by that smoke they're laying. They also launch torpedoes, and this is quite effective because by some miracle it hits the corvette and completely blows her out of the water, which was a real tragedy, all hands lost. But the destroyers keep firing. They're being rapidly pursued by the cruisers, and every shot is knicker-gripping. But ultimately the Mahura is again hit by gunnery from the destroyers, and the pursuit is now on, firmly on by sloops and destroyers chasing. But the Galileo Ferreras is racing to the rescue. Torpedoes fail to hit the Mahura, but deck gunnery does the job, and she's now crippled. But where the problem lies is that the submarine has electrical problems. You're going to see this, and she crash dives and is not navigating well underwater. You can see all the sonar blips going off there, and a huge number of ships after her. She's bought time, but ultimately will pay the price for that. More depth charges are basically launched from Kandahar, and she is ultimately hit and forced to the bottom, where she has to, the captain decides he's got to blow his tanks. She's crippled on the sea floor, and so she basically blows her tanks and effectively surrenders. Ironically, all the crew having their bags packed, they were very keen to get out of that death trap. So ultimately we had a really good game there. It was very interesting and rather challenging as well. So if we look at the overall assessment of what happened, the Royal Navy lost the Ellinger with a lot of men in the water, 2 convoy ships crippled, and they lost the corvette. Whilst the Italian fleet lost 2 precious submarines, but these are not really fit for service, and 4 bombers. Okay, let's now look at shark attack, because following the sinking of the Ellinger, I'd been very inspired some months ago about the thoughts of what happened to poor men in these sort of conditions, especially when you see the Indianapolis. I started reading a lot about that, and Charles McVeigh and his plight, and this was probably one of the most horrific incidents during the Second World War. Nicolas Cage is there in that film, and you've got Stacy Keach in Mission of the Shark. Well worth watching. But of a crew of 1,200 men, only 300 survivors, and estimated half of those were eaten by sharks. There's also the Birkenhead in 1852 off the coast of South Africa with Captain Salmond. This is where Major Seaton issued the order, women and children first. And another horrific shark attack with 600 on board and only 200 survivors, many killed by sharks. So I started conducting the research, looked at sharks themselves. I wanted to identify sharks in the Red Sea, of which it looks like the tiger shark was the most dangerous. I also came across, how to defend yourself from shark attacks, which I found rather fascinating. And given the number of shark attacks recently in the Red Sea, I thought it was pertinent. Now, this isn't meant to be a disrespectful game in any shape or form, but I wanted to look at, some ideas that I had about player decision making in terms of whether one goes for a selfish approach or a cooperative approach in these circumstances. And I wanted it to be very card driven. And more importantly, I wanted the players to move all the pieces. I would just purely be in observation. And so that's the construct behind this game. They've got to make the decisions for everything. I had to build this, but luckily I managed to find all these bits for about $5, including that jewellery. And I knocked all these things up really rather quickly, given that we'd had the Ellinger sinking. It had been here, but I thought, right, I'm going to use it. So let's now get into the mission of the Shark and what it's all about. So the Ellinger has gone down, about 100 already killed on board, and there are immediate rescue attempts, but the sharks have been activated by the noise and the blood in the water. And all men in the water have 3 wounds. Ultimately, those without buoyancy will be testing each turn and take a wound if they fail. And then there's a dehydration test every 3 turns. In addition, the ship's cat is on the raft, giving them 9 re-rolls. Now, this means that they've got to sort of cooperate, or not, as the case may be, as these sharks begin to surface and appear, their fins gliding through the water. A terrifying moment, I can't even imagine it, as sharks basically start to strike. And looking at these creatures, they're absolutely ferocious, and they're tearing men to pieces, but a lot of men are not floating well, and the sharks are circling and gaining in numbers. Again, I can only go out, my thoughts are with these guys, as these beasts just, perfect predators. They're bumping and attacking the rafts, and ultimately the men are trying to get to the rafts. The players are trying to save who they can. They're playing their cards to save people, to bump sharks, to do all sorts of things. And they also control Quinn, and he manages to kill a shark because he's actually got a knife. He's wounded though. More and more shark attacks continue to press, literally tearing men under. Some of the attacks are really horrific. Multiple attacks on individuals when we get a shark frenzy. Now, the players decided that the sharks could actually attack one another, and a number of these sharks killed each other just as the boats were coming into view. And this was really good because the sharks were beginning to attack the buoyancy rafts, and it was really knicker-gripping for them getting to those boats. But ultimately, the outcome, 3 sharks killed, 18 men lost, 11 through shark attacks. It was a brilliantly interesting game and really quite challenging. We've also got this turn covert operations with a number of shore parties being landed. I can't go into too many details at this time, but in the meantime, we've got coming up in our next episode, From Dusk Till Dawn, night operations. Can we never forget those that fought on the sea, their sacrifice? This is Military Wargaming. Please stop by, share and subscribe. It's bye for now.